You know that expression, stretched on the rack? Like when someone says, so-and-so is being stretched on the rack, to mean they're under a lot of pressure. Well, it comes exactly from here. And look, the original was considerably worse than the modern metaphor. Basically, it was a wooden structure, rectangular, with 2 large rollers, one at each extreme end. Your ankles were firmly attached to one roller, wrists attached to the other. And then someone simply turned a crank, very slowly. Guy Fawkes. You probably know his mask well, right? He was captured in the underground cellars of Parliament, with nothing less than 36 whole barrels of explosive gunpowder. He basically planned to completely blow up King James I, and like the entire Parliament together. So it wasn't exactly a minor crime, let's say. And King James personally wrote with his own hands the official torture warrant. We still have the original document preserved, kept in the British National Archives to this day. If he will not otherwise confess, the gentler tortures are first to be used upon him, and then step by step you may employ the harsher, and so speed your good work. They started initially with manacles, prolonged suspension by the wrists, and then eventually the rack itself. And after several continuous days, Guy finally completely gave in. He ended up naming absolutely all the conspirators involved. His body was so completely debilitated by the intense torture that he could barely physically climb the scaffold stairs. Now, the rack had a quite practical problem. It was too big, completely fixed in a specific place, and so the inquisitors started thinking, what if we could, torture people in literally any place? That's when they invented the Strappado, and basically it works like this. First, they tie your hands firmly behind your back, then they pass a thick rope through your tied wrists. They throw this rope over a pulley installed in the high ceiling, and finally, they simply pull you up. But of course, there was an even worse version of this, squassation, that's the technical name, which is exactly when they raise you up high and suddenly drop you completely. And then all that accumulated momentum goes straight and concentrated to the shoulders. Galileo Galilei, he publishes his dialogue concerning the 2 chief world systems, which basically argues, hey, so the Earth revolves around the sun and not the other way around as everyone thinks. And the Catholic Church responds like, no, definitely doesn't say that. They took Galileo personally to the specific room where all the torture instruments were, and they showed him in detail the strappado, the pulleys, the thick ropes, and they basically said quite clearly, look exactly what we can do to you now. But they never really did it, in fact. June 22nd, Galileo finally completely abjured. He publicly denied his own scientific discoveries, and officially declared that the Earth doesn't move at all. He was condemned to perpetual house arrest for the rest of his life, and the Catholic Church simply didn't officially forgive him, until 1992. Now let me show you something genuinely disturbing. Let's forward to 1900, official American army at colonial Philippines. Method used, violently forcing water through the victim's throat until they literally suffocate. The victim was firmly tied to their backs on an inclined board. A specific iron instrument, technically called bostezo, forcibly keeps the mouth open. A large cloth is violently forced down the throat, and then water is continuously poured through this cloth, up to an incredible 8 complete litres per session. From 1899 to 1902, the so-called Filipino-American War, the United States had just basically bought the Philippines directly from defeated Spain, and the native Filipinos responded like, we really don't want to be a colony of absolutely anyone, thank you very much. And an intense guerrilla war began, and so official American forces formally adopted the so-called water cure, exactly the same method, just with a different and more sanitized name. November 27th, 1900. Tobeniano Ealdama was elected president of the city of Igbaras. He was subjected to the American water cure under the direct supervision of Captain Edwin Glenn. And we know all these details because Sergeant Charles Riley courageously testified in an official court. So Riley described with details, when he was completely full of water, it was violently expelled by pressing a foot firmly on his stomach, and this continued uninterruptedly from 5 to 15 minutes. Year 1902, the Lodge Committee of the United States Senate conducted official public hearings. It completely exposed the practice, publicly and nationally. And do you know exactly what President Theodore Roosevelt publicly said in a private letter that leaked? He called it an old Filipino method of mild torture. Captain Glenn was even subjected to a formal court-martial, but eventually he received only an extremely light punishment. Gestapo, verschärfte Vernehmung. That's the official German term. Do you know what it means exactly? Enhanced interrogation. July 1st, 1937. Reinhard Heydrich officially issues a directive, completely formalising physical and psychological coercion under this specific euphemistic term. And look, this wasn't a linguistic accident, it was completely deliberate. The term was carefully designed to describe forms of torture that wouldn't leave permanent visible marks. Like, you can brutally torture someone and then present the person publicly. Heydrich's original directive required specific prior authorization from Gestapo Central Headquarters in Berlin. But then on June 12, 1942, Chief Heinrich Müller issues a new secret decree, vastly expanding the categories of people subject to the method. And the methods officially documented in Nuremberg document PS 1531 included prolonged stress positions, total sleep deprivation for extended periods, repeated baths in freezing water, and systematic and calculated beatings. The Gestapo grew exponentially from just 1,700 officers to an impressive 31,000 agents at its peak in 1944. The NKVD conveyor was the central interrogation method of the Soviets, which literally means conveyor belt. You don't move at all. The conveyor moves continuously, except that in this specific case, the conveyor was the interrogators, working in organised shifts, 24 complete hours a day. And you don't sleep for consecutive days, sometimes weeks. On January 10th, 1939, Stalin personally wrote a telegram, officially acknowledging that the Central Committee had permitted the application of physical measures of persuasion since 1937, another careful euphemism for torture. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn meticulously documented approximately 31 distinct methods of Soviet torture based on his own personal testimony. The methods included prolonged sleep deprivation, swan dive, body arched like a wheel with a towel stuffed between the jaw and tied to the heels, special boxes where prisoners couldn't sit or stand adequately, repeated blows to the solar plexus specifically, and direct and detailed threats to family members. But the conveyor was the basis of everything, because eventually, without sleep, you simply collapse mentally. So up to here we've seen brutal physical torture, but now let's go to something different. Cold War 1950s, and the CIA decided to ask a question: what if we could control minds? And the answer to that question destroyed lives. MKULTRA, the CIA's secret mind control program, officially authorized on April 13, 1953 by Director Alan Dulles and supervised by a chemist named Sidney Gottlieb. The stated objective? Find a reliable truth drug and develop interrogation techniques based on mind control. Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, Sub-Project 68, the most devastating case of all. Cameron wasn't some obscure unknown doctor. From 1952 to 1953, he was president of the American Psychiatric Association and then president of the World Psychiatric Association in 1961. His methods included something called psychic driving. Patients were placed in comas induced by heavy drugs for up to 86 complete consecutive days, while looped tapes repeated messages continuously. November 18th, 1953. Frank Olson was at a retreat at Deep Creek Lodge, Maryland, with work colleagues, and someone secretly spiked his drink with LSD without consent. And in the following days, Olson began having a severe psychotic crisis. November 28th, 10 days later, Frank Olson fell from the 10th floor window of the Hotel Statler in New York, or was pushed, depending on who you believe. In 1975, the Rockefeller Commission reopened the case, and President Gerald Ford personally apologized to the family. Decades later, in 1994, the family exhumed the body for an independent autopsy, and they discovered a previously unreported cranial hematoma, inconsistent with the described fall, consistent with being struck before falling. The son, Eric Olson, publicly declared Frank Olson's death was a murder, not a suicide. He died out of concern that he would disclose information about a highly secret interrogation program. To this day, it officially remains inconclusive. Now let's forward to 2002, CIA post 9/11. Two memoranda signed by Jay Bybee, written by John Yoo. They redefined torture in an extremely restrictive way. According to the new official definition, physical pain would only qualify as torture if it were equivalent in intensity to the pain accompanying serious physical injury such as organ failure, loss of bodily function, or death. So, you can cause intense pain, but as long as the organs don't fail, technically, it's not torture. The program was architected by James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen, former instructors of the SEER program. SEER means survival, evasion, resistance, escape, a training for American soldiers to resist torture if captured. Neither had experience as a professional interrogator and specialised knowledge about Al-Qaeda. They were psychologists, not interrogators. But even so, the CIA hired them, and their company received $81 million. Abu Zubaydah. To the CIA, he was initially the ultimate prize. A senior figure within Al-Qaeda, the truth would eventually come to light, proving he wasn't even a part of the organisation. But for that brief window in time, they believed they held one of the most dangerous men in the world. When the FBI stepped in for the first interrogation, they did the unexpected. They set aside aggression and leaned heavily into classic rapport-building techniques. The strategy worked brilliantly. It unlocked a vault of crucial secrets. It was from these very conversations that the name Khalid Sheikh Mohammed emerged, revealed to the world as the principal architect of 9/11. Captured on March 1st, 2003, and he was waterboarded 183 times. A CIA physician described the process as a series of repeated near drownings. KSM was also subjected to standing sleep deprivation for more than 132 consecutive hours. The physician on site concluded that waterboarding was completely ineffective. KSM had figured out a way to deal with it, but even so, they continued for 10 more days. And you know what KSM did? He fabricated information. He told interrogators exactly what he thought they wanted to hear, sending the CIA on wild goose chases. Entire operations based on false information. In 2014, the Feinstein report was finally published. Senator Dianne Feinstein led a massive investigation, reviewing more than 6 million pages of classified CIA documents. The principal findings included that techniques were not effective in obtaining reliable intelligence. The CIA consistently provided false information to Congress and the White House about effectiveness. Detainees routinely fabricated intelligence. The CIA actively impeded effective oversight and systematically destroyed evidence. Special Prosecutor John Durham formally investigated 101 cases of CIA abuse and closed them without any criminal charges. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.